I'm talking to my friend Jennifer. So anyway, she's complaining to me about her job in investment banking and the people she has to work with. And I said, dear, I'll make you a deal. I'll get my hands on a whole bunch of money and you can come work for me as my money manager. And she said, Dan, you don't need a money manager and you sure as hell can't afford me. How are you going to pull this off? I said, I could find one of those 20-foot shipping containers full of drug cartel money that's hidden in the barns. Drugs come north, drugs go out of the containers refill with cash, and then they get smuggled back down south. Find out where one of those containers is sitting. I make 15 or 20 phone calls, put the band back together, 3 or 4 days of rehearsals. We go hit it, and then I'm going to call you because I'm going to need your help laundering $500 million. And she just stared, and she said, wait, you know how to do that? And I thought about it for a second. Wait a minute. I can do this. I can write this. And I opened up a Word document. I started pounding away on my laptop. And all of a sudden I got 10,000 words. And I got 20,000 words. And then I got 30,000 words. I'm like, too long to be a short story. It might turn into a novel.
Hey, let's welcome my guest, Daniel Kemp, U.S. Army veteran and author. Welcome to the show, sir, and good to see you.
Thanks, Danny. Thanks for having me.
Thank you for coming. Let's start with your background for those people who don't know you.
That would be most of them.
Well, maybe apart from your friends and family who are watching this. So what's your background, how you became an army, how you joined the army, how you became the author?
Journey. Wow. All right. I grew up around very close to my World War II veteran grandparents and all of their circle of World War II friends. So I sort of got obsessed with military history at a young age. And then I was one of those weird kids that didn't seem to fit into any respectable civilian profession. So I just sort of decided, okay, cool. This is something I can do when I grow up to avoid starving to death. And my grandfather had been a sergeant in World War II, said, you need to go in as an officer. Okay. Well, I wasn't smart enough to get into West Point. Definitely didn't have the grades to get into West Point. Thought about going to the Citadel, but that required a lot of money. VMI wanted higher math grades than I had. So I ended up at Ole Miss. And the Ole Miss ROTC unit at the time was a delightful collection of rednecks on a campus that had some of the hottest women I had ever seen in my entire life. Ole Miss, I believe, produced something like 54 general officers, including the Confederate ones, and 3 Miss Americas. I'm wandering around the Ole Miss campus. There's a recent Miss Teen USA there, and, I'm just having a great time. I'm like, this is great. I'm going to learn how to be an Army officer. Then a couple years later, I hurt my knee and Bill Clinton was president and I ended up out of my ass and I had to choose another career detour. So I was fixing slot machines in a casino in Tunica, Mississippi for a couple of years. When I had the idea that if I stay in the casino business, I'm going to be dead or in rehab in another 2 years. Maybe I need to give my knee's feeling better. Maybe I need to give this Army thing another look. So I finally graduated Ole Miss after 6.5 years. Most people who take 6.5 years to graduate Ole Miss are referred to as doctors and lawyers, and I am neither. And from there, it was off to the U.S. Army Infantry School at Fort Benning, Georgia, which then was Fort Moore for a minute. Now it's Fort Benning again. Life is weird like that. So Fort Benning to Korea to Fort Campbell. Had a delightful time at Fort Campbell. Was here 9 years active duty, then a few more as a contractor. Then I drifted into the civil service from there, but I don't talk about my day job much because it's boring. Well, it's boring, and also there's certain, non-disclosure agreements attached to it. And a couple of years ago, the writing bug hit me. I've been reading since I was 3 or 4. I read a lot. I don't read as much as I used to because, I started writing. And if I had just stuck to reading books, it would probably be a good bit less frustrating. And how I started writing is a whole different story that we'll save that for the next one. But yeah, it's been a wild ride, and here we go.
Yeah, so definitely an interesting story. So tell me about your books. Worse. So how does it get worse? Let's start with that.
Well, how did I start writing? Wow. Okay. Anybody who reads as much as I do is going to have some idea that they can write. And I've written history papers and short story assignments and this and that. I had writing of the short story at Ole Miss with a guy named Barry Hanna. The year he won the Pulitzer for one of his short story collections. That's sort of like having Albert Einstein for your physics instructor. Kind of a learning cliff instead of a learning curve. But I never really finished anything. Partly the workload, partly the ADD. I just never really finished anything that was worth publishing. I'm going to go and take my glasses off, trying to cut some of the glare. So let's see. 2016, an army buddy of mine named Seth Bailey used me as a minor character in his third novel titled Edge of the City, which involved a large fictional gunfight in the city of Dallas, in which a whole bunch of his friends made appearances as fictional versions of themselves. And he dusted off one of my old army nicknames, which was Professor, which was not meant as a compliment. And I ended up making an appearance in his novel as a fictionalized version of myself. Then he said, hey, all of you guys who I put in my book, you need to take your characters and write them, and we can have this whole shared fictional space. It'll be like the Marvel Cinematic Universe, but with less spandex, and it'll be less gay, and we'll have guns and drugs and all kinds of fun stuff. It'll be great because Seth makes me look rational. That takes work, but Seth makes me look rational. So the next year, I'm talking to my friend Jennifer. My friend Jennifer is this gorgeous little Korean chick, about yay tall, yay wide, just petite and cute. And she was also summa cum laude at Harvard Business School. She is a whole lot of smart and a whole lot of not especially stable. When a brain like that gets a little wiggly at that high RPM, hold on, it's going to be a wild ride. So anyway, she's complaining to me about her job in investment banking and the people she has to work with. And I said, dear, I'll make you a deal. I'll get my hands on a whole bunch of money, and you can come for work for me as my money manager. And that way you won't have to work for that guy anymore. And she said, Dan, you're a disabled vet who lives in the backwoods of Tennessee and brings home maybe 35 grand a year in a good year. You don't need a money manager, and you sure as hell can't afford me. How are you going to pull this off? And I said, well, I can either hit Powerball. And she said, I'm not even going to dignify that with an answer. I said, or I could find one of those 20-foot shipping containers full of drug cartel money that's hidden in the barns. Drugs come north, drugs go out of the containers refill with cash, and then they get smuggled back down south. Find out where one of those containers is sitting. I make 15 or 20 phone calls, put the band back together, 3 or 4 days of rehearsals. We go hit it, and then I'm going to call you because I'm going to need your help laundering $500 million. And she just stared, and she said, wait, you know how to do that? And I said, dear, an infantry raid is an infantry raid. I don't care if you're hitting an Iraqi army headquarters facility, robbing a bank, or in this case, hitting a barn with a shipping container in it. Intelligence, reconnaissance, near side security, far side security. There's a process. The dance is the dance, and it is what it is. And then I thought about it for a second, and I remembered what Seth had said about writing our own characters. And I thought, wait a minute, I can do this. I can write this. And I opened up a Word document, and I started pounding away on my laptop. And all of a sudden, I got 10,000 words. Then I got 20,000 words. And then I got 30,000 words. I'm like, too long to be a short story. It might turn into a novel. And I keep going, and I keep going, and I keep going. And I get to about 70,000 words when my self-confidence gauge goes from here to about here. And I'm telling myself, this sucks. Nobody's ever going to want to read this. Why am I wasting my time on this? This is bullshit. Nobody's going to want to read this. So I turned to my buddy Chris, who I was in grad school with at Norwich. And Chris at that point was an active duty Air Force lieutenant colonel, and is now, having made Bird and then since retired, he's an editor for Raconteur Press, which is one of our peers in the indie sci-fi military fiction game. So I sent it off to Chris. He said, give me a day. Then I wait a day. He says, give me a little more time, because he's got a wife and kids and more of a life than I do. And he messages me back. He says, if you don't finish this, I'm going to drive up there. I'm going to fucking kill you. Really? You're not large enough. He said, no, I'll just hang out a couple 100 yards back with a rifle. Finish this or I'm going to kill you. I'm like, who's going to want to read this? He said, dude, you wrote the classic heist novel. It is a Guy Ritchie novel. He said, I hear the narrator as Jason Statham. He said, it's Snatch. It's Lock, Stock, and Two Smoking Barrels. He said, keep going. You got to finish this. I'm like, man, I don't know if I can do this. And I'm poking at it, and I keep going, and I keep going. And eventually I get about 120,000 words. I'm used to Tom Clancy novels when I was a kid that were about that thick. I write long. I do. I write longer than the modern genre conventions say I should. But I think about it, and I'm like, okay. And I'm almost done. And I go down to the LibertyCon Sci-Fi Convention in Chattanooga, which involves a rifle range trip at the beginning. It's that side of sci-fi fandom. It's not the fluffy granola eating, peace, love, hippie side of sci-fi fandom. It's the do aliens understand war crimes? They will when we're done with them side of fandom. And I get there and I get talking to a guy at a rifle range. Long story short, he looks at me and says, "You written anything?" I said, "Well, I got a couple of short stories that may see daylight one day, but I got this novel manuscript that I don't know what to do with." He looks at me, he says, "You know, I'm a publisher, right?" I said, "No offense, man. I got no idea who the hell you are." He says, "Oh, John Holmes, no relation to the famous adult film actor." He said, "You remember the old PowerPoint Ranger Facebook page?" "Yeah. Now I know who you are." He said, "Yep, that was me before my chain of command gave me an order to stop writing it." "Yep, I definitely know who you are now." He said, "So anyway, I started writing sci-fi and I call my company Canon Publishing because I was in the artillery. And I'm looking for a couple of other writers to publish their stuff in addition to mine. So talk to me about this novel of yours." And I said, "I'm going to be honest with you. It is a thinly veiled ripoff of Kelly's Heroes, which, if you are not familiar, is a World War II movie about robbing a bank." And he nods. He says, "That's one of my favorite movies. That's one of a lot of people's favorite movies. Keep talking." And I said, "All right." And we chatted back and forth. And he said, "You got a copy of it with you?" I said, "Got a copy of my email that's about 90% of the 90% done." "What's your email address?" "I got it." So he says, "All right, man, I got to go. I've got a panel discussion down at the main convention site in an hour. I'm doing a meeting for prospective authors tomorrow, and I need you there." Cool. So I finished shooting because I don't have anywhere in particular to be, and I'd paid all the money for range rental. So I get down there to the hotel, and I'm passing John going in and out of the convention center. And he's looking at his phone and looking at me and giggling. And I said, "Well, that's either a good sign or a bad sign. I don't know which. I don't know. This could be good. This could be bad." I see him at the author meeting the next day. Everybody else has got what they are convinced is the great novel that they want to talk to John about. I'm just sort of hanging back listening to the general tone of the lecture. We get to the end. He grabs me, he pulls me off to the side, and he looks up at me because John's shorter than I. He says, "All right, I'm only 4 chapters in. You wrote it first person, which is a very limiting way for an author to, but you wrote it the way you talk. So it's very fluid and very engaging and very caffeinated." Okay. He nods. He says, "Ah, fuck it. Let's do this. Somebody will buy it." I'm thinking, cool. I just sold my first novel. And he's like, we shake hands and I go off around outside the hotel over to the smoke deck and I grab a cigar and I'm like, oh yeah. Puffin Victory cigar. Man, I just sold my first novel. I've got the world by the short and curlies at that moment. I am on top of the universe. And then John sticks his head out and yells at me, says, "Oh yeah, I need the whole thing done in a month." Nervous puffing, panic attack. And this little short brown-haired guy comes walking by with a bottle in his hand and says, "Man, you look like you need a drink." Yes, I do. "Here you go, man." "That's really good. May I please have some more?" Steady the nerves. "Man, this stuff's really good. What's that called?" So in the process of finishing the novel, there was a short scene in Dallas, Texas, where I wrote in that particular brand of bourbon and mentioned that it was very hard to get where the narrator lived, because it is. About a year later, after, the novel had been out a while, ding, on Facebook, and this little brown-haired guy's like, "Hey, man, that was me with the bottle of Oak and Eden. I love the book." I said, "Thank you." He said, "You going to be at the con this year?" I said, "Yeah." He said, "Cool. You want a bottle?" I said, yes, please." So he brings, he comes by the autograph table, bought the first one, bought the sequel, signed them both. And then he sets the bottle up on the table. I said, "Man, I'm probably going to have to hand you your money right back. What do I owe you for the bottle?" He looked at me and said, "Man, I made $70,000 in overtime this last year. This one's on me." I may not have the largest fan base in military fiction, but I do have some of the most devoted. Love those guys, truly do. So anyway, that's how the author journey really got going. Because the first novel came out, and John looked at me and said, "Need the sequel in a year." Second novel came out, "Need it in a year. I'm working on the fourth one right now." And I told John one time, I said, "The first one took me 4.5 years to write, right?" He said, "Yeah, but you didn't have me riding your ass at the times. Get going." That's it. That is how I drifted from being a military history nerd and active duty Army vet to a part-time novelist.
So, how many books did you publish in total?
Right now, I have 3 novels out and 4 short story collections. That's about to be 6 short story collections over the next few months. I have another one coming out. I have another military alternate history collection coming out with James Young. That's another story right there. James is another interesting fellow. He'd actually be fun for you to interview. Works at the Army's Command General Staff College, West Point graduate, but his hobby and his abiding side passion is alternate history short stories. Take an event in history, turn it 90 degrees, see what would happen, and see which way the arc of history would bend from there. I've done 2 for him. One was an alternate sinking of the Bismarck, and the other one was what happens if Custer wins at Little Bighorn? How does that rewrite the history of the American West? I took the consequences of that one, and they go all the way through the Spanish-American War. A live George Armstrong Custer would be an extremely disruptive influence on what we think of as recorded history. And there's a couple of true history books that I would very much like to write if I had the time, and if some of the subject material involved wouldn't be somewhat sensitive. Because my master's thesis that I had wanted to write was on the revolution in U.S. Army urban warfare doctrine between 1993 to 2000, what I called the Black Hawk Down effect, where fighting in cities it stopped being, at least from the American point of view, it stopped being Stalingrad. It stopped being tanks and artillery, and all of a sudden it became a precision game of rifles for guys with what had previously been special operations style equipment and skill sets. And I thought that would be the coolest master's thesis ever. And my master's thesis advisor, a retired sergeant first class named John Broom, who also had a PhD and just retired as the assistant program director at Norwich this past week, he listened to my idea, he nodded, and he said, no, absolutely not. But I've got all this research, and I've got all these interviews lined up, and I know this guy, and this guy, and this guy, and this guy, and I've got all of this research. It's going to be great. He said, Dan, no. Why not, Doc? And he said, it's a book-length subject. You have 45 pages. He said, it should be a book. I hope you write the book. I very much want to read this book. You're not doing it in a master's thesis. He said, no. This sucks. Now I have to go write something else that I don't want to write. And I did. And I did very well. I still couldn't make it fit in 45 pages. I turned in 53. So residency week, summer of 2012, I'm walking down the front of the lecture hall. I'm first one going in for my thesis presentation. I volunteered to go first. That way I didn't have to stay sober for the rest of the week. There's a very, very good bar on campus at Norwich, and they pour some of the best weird Vermont microbrews that you can't get anywhere else. And I intended to sample all of them while I was there because I didn't have to drive anywhere. But anyway, I'm walking down front to first one up to present, and Doc yells from the back of the lecture hall, Kemp, just because you turned in 20% more paper doesn't mean you get 20% more time. Thanks, Doc. So, of course, I got the stopwatch on my watch going and did the presentation plenty of time. It went great. And I started drinking at lunch that day, and that was pretty much my week. Lovely time. I enjoyed it. But, yeah, 3 cheers for graduate school. But I just ended up doing so much reading that you get a head full of words, and eventually those words start leaking out on paper, and you're like, I gotta write this. No, I'm done with this. I'm gonna write this. No, I'm gonna save that. Maybe I'll come back to it later. Gonna write this instead. But then one day lightning strikes like it did when I started writing what became door number 3. And the words just kept coming and coming and coming and coming, and I'm like, oh shit, I'm going to have to finish this. I've never finished one of these before. I've started a lot of them. I've never finished one. And then I did. And then once you write your first one, then you've got to sell it. And selling the damn things is infinitely harder than writing them. You do podcast interviews, you do Facebook ads, you sit at behind autograph tables at conventions. And you'll see people walking by that you kind of know, be like, I sell you a copy of my book yet? And they'll look at you and be like, no. And they'll come over and they'll look at it and they're like, wow, that does look good. And they start thumbing through it. I'm like, yeah, I'll take a copy. What do you want for it? And it goes for $16.99 on Amazon in paperback. But, of course, I'm trying to earn enough, I'm trying to earn enough to cover my hotel bill for the weekend. Be like, $20 if you got it, because you cannot afford to have shame. You cannot afford to have morals. You have to have the unapologetic charisma of a used car salesman if you are going to successfully sell your own books. There's a guy I write with at Canon, name is Scott, who writes beautiful novels. The guy's a much better writer than I am a better salesman than he is because I have learned to turn off my shame. I have learned to caffeinate my charisma. I'm willing to do podcast interviews and be completely shameless about them. And if you're not willing to do that and get out there and be your own best salesman, you're never going to make it as an indie writer. I'm never going to make quit my day job money at this. I'm trying to buy a couple more guns. I did buy a hot tub. That was kind of cool. I mean, it was used and it needed a couple of parts that I haven't had the money for yet. Needs a new heater. That's going to be enough. That'll be next month's royalty checks, I hope. But, it's a process. Will I ever make Tom Clancy money? No, I won't. Which is too bad. I met Tom Clancy twice. Not to speak too much ill of the dead, the guy was kind of a dick. All right, anyway, if you don't stop me and ask another question, I'm just going to keep talking.
Yeah, no, it's, your books, and I haven't had a chance to read them, but they're probably as engaging as your stories. So it's all good.
Thank you. Thank you.
We do have just 5 minutes left, but could you give advice for writers or for people who want to write a book but have never done that? Something that you've learned and something that may help them overcome this roadblock and actually write their first book and eventually sell it.
The first thing, there's a podcast on Facebook run by a guy named Larry Correia, who's a very, very good sci-fi writer. And Larry has made enough money. He's gone from indie author publishing his own stuff on the internet to some major publishing contracts to the point he bought a literal mountain in Utah and built a mansion on top of it with a firing range out the side yard. Larry is living the dream. Larry is also a very nice guy. He really is. He plays a caricature of himself on Twitter, but picking fights with people. But he's a very nice guy. He runs a group called the Writer Dojo. In the Writer Dojo, we have an acronym, BICHOC, butt in seat, hands on keyboard. The first step to writing a book is sit down and write the fucking thing. You've got it. You ever just like, I wrote one chapter and I'm editing it. No, write the whole damn thing. Sure, if you need a break, go back and look at something you wrote. You've got to have the words to edit before you can edit them. That is the number one thing. You've got to get the words out of your head and into your electronic writing device of choice. Some people can write on smartphones. I can't. One thumbing your way through, no. Yeah, I can't do it. My hands are a little too big, I guess. I need a real keyboard. But once I've got a real keyboard and once the words are hitting, sure, I'll have a good day and I'll blow 5,000 words, a good day. Then I'll have days when I struggle to get 50. Some days you are fighting the voices in your own head. Some days you're fighting the fact that the dog wants out or something in the house broke and I got to fix it instead. There's always going to be distractions, but you got to work around your distractions, work through your distractions, and get them done and get the words out before you can edit them. And then once you write it, you can edit it. And once you edit it and you have something that you're willing to show to somebody, then you worry about getting it published. And once you've got a publishable product, somebody will take it.
And you still need to sell it though, right?
Oh, God. I could go for half an hour on selling books. Selling books is a friggin' nightmare. I should have warned you before we started this. I do tend to cuss a bit. You can always go back with the bleep button and fix it. I won't be offended.
Look, if you want, what we can do is we can have a follow-up part 2 where we can talk about how to sell books or maybe something else.
Sounds good.
All right. Well, Dan, great episode. Great part 1 for sure.
Thank you very much. Thank you for having me, Danny.
Absolutely. And the link to Dan's books is in the description. Thank you, and I'll see you in the next one.
Thank you.